Most people think this war is decided by tanks or missiles or trenches, but the real battlefield is something colder, something quieter, an ocean of money, because out there more than 600 ghost tankers are moving in the dark. No rules that matter, no paperwork you can trust, just steel, oil, and silence. And every time one ship slips through, it's not just fuel, it's cash, it's leverage, it's war funding. In fact, this hidden pipeline can cover as much as 40% of Russia's war budget. So Ukraine isn't just fighting soldiers anymore, Ukraine is hunting the system. With naval drones, cheap, fast, relentless. If you want the real story behind this shadow economy, tap subscribe. Because what happens next won't just hit Russia, it could shake the global energy map. And here's the turning point. This isn't smuggling anymore. It's an entire machine, and Ukraine just found the artery. Here's what most people miss. Sanctions were designed to choke Russia's war economy, to cut off cash, to isolate Moscow. But oil doesn't disappear when you sanction it. It simply changes shape. It goes darker, it goes quieter. Russia built a workaround, a parallel shipping universe, a moving network of tankers that can carry roughly 7.5 million barrels a day, not as a side hustle, as a survival system. And that system has a simple purpose. Keep oil flowing, keep money moving, keep the war machine breathing. For years the world treated this like a paperwork problem. Track the ships, find the companies, freeze the assets. Ukraine is treating it like what it really is, a battlefield. Because when you hit a tanker, you don't just damage steel. You disrupt cash flow, you raise insurance, you scare buyers, you force discounts, and once that starts, the whole structure begins to crack. Now let's rewind. Because this shadow fleet didn't appear overnight, it was engineered step by step under pressure. This story begins the moment Russia realized one truth. You can survive battlefield losses, but you can't survive a financial shutdown. So after 2022, Moscow started buying time and buying ships. Not modern fleets, not shiny new tankers, old ones, tired ones, the kind the world was ready to retire. More than 400 tankers were pulled into this shadow system since the war began. And at first it worked, because when the world closes one door, markets open 10 windows. A different flag, a different shell company, a different route. This is how sanctions decay over time. They don't fail in one dramatic moment. They leak, they stretch, they get gamed. And the longer a war drags on, the more incentives grow. Traders chase discounts, middlemen chase profit, states look away. That's the cycle. Pressure creates adaptation. Adaptation creates a new economy. But the shadow fleet had one hidden weakness. It was never infinite. The entire global pool of older tankers that fit this role is only around 800, 900 ships, meaning Russia's workaround has a physical ceiling, and now Ukraine is pushing it toward that ceiling fast. Next comes the first explosion, the moment this silent machine becomes a target. Then the ocean changed, because Ukraine didn't just threaten the shadow fleet. Ukraine struck it, not with a navy the way the world imagines navies, but with something smaller, smarter, and terrifyingly modern. Sea drones, remote, explosive, hard to stop once they're moving. A ship like Karos gets hit, and suddenly every captain in the network feels it, not as a headline, as a warning. Then it happens again. Virat, then Midvolgatu. 3 names that sound like shipping trivia. But in this war, they're financial arteries, because each strike does more than punch a hole in steel. It punches into confidence. It sends a message to insurers, to buyers, to every broker who thought this system was untouchable. And that's when the invisible costs begin. Rates go up, routes get longer, margins shrink, discounts deepen. Russia can still sell oil, but now it has to sell it under fear. If you're still watching, drop a comment. Do you think this kind of warfare spreads next to other choke points in other oceans? Because the first crisis wasn't just damage, it was a shift in logic. Ukraine showed the world something brutal. You don't need to sink a fleet. You just need to make it too expensive to run. And that leads to the hidden mechanism, the system inside the system. To understand why these strikes matter, you need to see how the shadow fleet actually works, not as ships, as a business model. The core trick is simple: disappear, then reappear somewhere else as a new identity. Ships switch flags, ships switch owners, ships switch paperwork. Sometimes the tracking signal goes dark, and in the middle of the sea, oil can move ship to ship. A quiet transfer, a legal fog, a transaction that exists but can't be pinned down fast enough. This is why sanctions feel powerful on paper and weak in motion, because sanctions attack the visible world. The shadow fleet lives in the invisible one. But here's what Ukraine discovered. This system doesn't break when you argue with it. It breaks when you make it unsafe. When sea drones appear, the calculus changes. A tanker isn't just a tanker anymore. It's a risk, a floating liability. And the moment risk rises, the entire supply chain reacts. Insurance premiums spike, ports hesitate, buyers demand bigger discounts. Russia can keep exporting oil, but it has to sell cheaper and pay more to move it. That's how you squeeze a war economy without marching forward a single mile. And just as the world starts absorbing this new reality, Ukraine turns the pressure higher, because the next crisis isn't one strike, it's a campaign. And then the pattern becomes undeniable. This isn't a warning shot anymore, it's a hunt. Ukraine's sea drones aren't trying to win a battle, they're trying to collapse an engine. Because every successful hit creates a ripple, not just in the water, in global pricing, in shipping routes, in risk models. The shadow fleet was built to survive paperwork. It was never built to survive explosions. And the pressure isn't only offshore. Ukraine is also striking where Russia turns crude into usable power. Refineries, processing points, industrial nodes that keep the system running. When facilities like Afipsky get targeted, the damage spreads beyond the blast radius. It reduces output. It squeezes logistics. It forces rerouting. And by 2025, that squeeze starts showing up as real economic pain. Roughly 17% of Russian refining capacity is knocked out. Seaborne refined exports fall to about 1/5 of normal. That's not symbolic. That's structural. And suddenly Russia faces a brutal choice. Spend more to protect the fleet, or accept more losses to keep oil moving. But here's the real trap. You can't fully protect a network designed to be hidden. The moment you guard it like a military asset, you admit what it really is. And when that happens, the war spreads into civilian life. Because systems don't collapse politely, they collapse on people. And this is where the story stops being about ships and starts being about you. Because when a country loses money, it doesn't lose it evenly. It doesn't fall gently. It lands on ordinary lives. When the war economy tightens, the pressure doesn't stay at the top. It moves downward into wages, into prices, into the quiet fear people carry home at night. You might not live in Russia. You might not live in Ukraine. But you've felt this kind of squeeze before. The moment energy becomes unstable, everything gets expensive. Food, transport, heating, business costs. And the worst part is the uncertainty. Not knowing what the next month looks like, not knowing what the next bill will be, not knowing if the system will protect you or abandon you. This is what modern conflict creates, a world where war isn't just violence, it's volatility. So here's my question to you. If money is the fuel of war, should the world be targeting the cash flow more aggressively? If you want deeper breakdowns like this, subscribe now, because the next layer of this story is global. And once the ocean becomes a battlefield, every coastline becomes a front line. Once you see the shadow fleet for what it is, you realize something unsettling. This isn't just Russia's workaround, it's a global stress test. Because oil doesn't belong to one country anymore. It belongs to the network that can move it, insure it, trade it, hide it. The shadow fleet rewires the energy map. It creates new corridors of influence, new middlemen, new silent alliances built around discounts and deniability, and every drone strike sends a message far beyond the Black Sea, to buyers, to ports, to insurers, to governments that don't want a wider confrontation but still want cheap fuel. This is how a regional war becomes a worldwide lever, not by invading new territory, but by destabilizing logistics. Because if shipping becomes dangerous, the market reacts instantly. Prices move, contracts change, companies pull back, and suddenly the question isn't who controls the land, it's who controls the flow. That's why this matters for Europe, for Asia, for every country living on imported energy. And it matters for Russia too, because the more pressure Ukraine applies, the more Moscow has to sell oil under harsher terms. Cheaper prices, higher costs, greater dependence on shadow networks. Now the world stands at a fork in the road, and the future splits into three possible outcomes. So where does this go next? There are three futures, and each one tells you something about the world we've built. Scenario 1, the contained rupture. Ukraine keeps hitting the shadow fleet. Russia adapts, but slower than before. Insurance costs rise. Discounts deepen. Cash flow shrinks. The war becomes harder to finance. Not impossible, just more expensive. This is the future where pressure works, not as a miracle, as erosion. Scenario 2, the gray zone expansion. The shadow fleet doesn't collapse. It mutates, new intermediaries appear, new routes open, new flags rotate in, and the system becomes even harder to track. This is the future where sanctions don't fail. They evolve into a permanent game of whack-a-mole. Scenario 3, the global spill. More strikes, more retaliation, more accidents, a major spill, a blocked route, a panic reaction in energy markets, and suddenly the world learns the real lesson. When you weaponize supply chains, you weaponize everyone's stability. Because in modern geopolitics, power doesn't only come from armies. It comes from logistics, from insurance, from the ability to move resources safely across the planet. And right now, that system is being tested with explosives. Which brings us to the only question that matters. What does this mean for you after the headlines fade? Here's the final insight. This war isn't just about territory. It's about systems. And the most dangerous systems aren't the ones you can see. They're the ones that quietly keep running until they suddenly don't. The shadow fleet was built to turn oil into immunity, to turn shipping into a loophole, to turn sanctions into theater. But Ukraine's sea drones changed the meaning of safe. They showed that even a hidden economy has a physical body, and bodies can be hurt. So the real question is no longer, can Russia sell oil? The question is, how long can Russia keep selling it under pressure? Because when the cost of movement rises, the cost of war rises with it. And when the cost of war rises, the future narrows. If you want to understand the next phase of this conflict, not the slogans, not the propaganda, but the mechanics, then subscribe, because the next chapter isn't happening on a battlefield. It's happening in shipping lanes, refineries, and financial backdoors the world pretends not to see. And in 2025, the scariest weapon may not be a missile. It may be a drone aimed at the money,